Okay, great. We're gonna go ahead and get started here. Thank you guys, everyone, for taking the time out of your day to join. This is an exclusive webinar today on the foundations in applied behavioral science. Very excited about this. This is actually one of our largest webinars to date, and we have many different brands representing a lot of different industries from CPG to healthcare, financial services, as well as some retailers. So pretty excited to bring this webinar, which I think for most people should provide a lot of interesting insights into how we can bring more applied behavioral science to our research functions. So before we begin, I just wanted to set a couple notes. This is an hour webinar, so in this webinar will be recorded. So for those who cannot attend or would like to refer back, we will be sending out a link after for those to watch the recording. If you have any questions at any point, there should be a question box. Feel free to type those questions in. We'll try to address those towards the end. And if we're unable to, we'll follow up directly with you via email. So without further ado, let's begin. So I first just want to introduce myself. I'm going to be conducting the webinar today. My name is Jason Marticello, and I'm working on behalf of b-sci, a behavioral science agency. And I just wanted to kind of give a little brief background on how I came into market research. Like most people in this industry, I find everyone has kind of an interesting story. And mine kind of plays out in that I used to be an obese child, and I lost a considerable amount of weight, over 100 pounds. And, I really was super curious at how and why I did it. And I ended up going to school at the University of South Florida, got a master's in exercise physiology, conducted research there, published a meta-analysis, and then I kind of wanted to go work in the field and actually change other people's behavior. And one of the biggest realizations I had from doing that was everything I learned wasn't really applying to what I did. In other words, a lot of the change that people experience was due to things other than education about fitness and nutrition, but it was more social influences, the context of our decisions, and just many other non-conscious variables that were never taught. So I pivoted my career and I went into the behavioral sciences. I worked for a behavioral science agency. It was called Catalyst Behavioral Sciences, and this was led by Dr. David Neal. So I was very fortunate to work with a lot of academics early on, some of the founders and pioneers of the field. For instance, I was working with Dan Ariely's Center for Advanced Hindsight, and got to work with a lot of just brilliant minds. I went back to business school and end up realizing after working with this group that they weren't really focused on growing the business, and it kind of violated pretty much every principle in the business school book. So I was very fortunate to move to New York, and started working with b-sci, which I'm going to explain in a second. For those of you that no one ever questioned my credentials, but they always question whether they need evidence that I lost the weight. So there's the photo. So currently work with b-sci Strategy. It's a behavioral science agency, and we're purely focused on helping our clients achieve commercial outcomes via using behavioral science. So the focus of today, I'm going to go an outline of, we're going to go through kind of three big buckets of things. The first is just understand kind of the evolution of decision-making. This kind of sets up the why for why behavioral science is important and how we should be using it. This kind of leads into the three ways we're going to disclose how you can infuse behavioral science into your research programs. And then we're going to finish off with three case examples. Have a special guest towards the end. It should be exciting, so hold off for that. So first, let's start with the evolution of decision making. It all kind of stems back to this guy, Adam Smith, who happens to be like the father of economics. He invented or developed the concept of GDP. And most importantly, as it relates to this presentation, he came up with this rational choice theory. And pretty much that, what that meant was, people are, looking to maximize their decisions. And we're going to show this in an example in a second. But I think, this pretty much laid the foundation of economics until, this gentleman, Herbert Simon, came along. And most of his influential work from 1950s and 70s really changed the paradigm and influenced the direction of a lot of the research in economics and decision making. And then finally, we'll discuss Mr. Daniel Kahneman, who many of you are most likely have heard of or familiar with. He's the most recent of the group who's significantly impacted the way we understand how people make decisions. So to make this, instead of just rifling off the history and a lot of their findings, I like to kind of layer this in an example. And one I find is very intuitive that we all do is grocery shopping. So, imagine John is grocery shopping, looking to buy some mixed greens here. How would he go about making this choice? And if we were to look through the paradigm of the rational choice theory, it would look something like this. We'd look at all the, identify the objectives, we'd gather information, all the information, we'd evaluate all that information, and then we'd compare all those alternatives and then ultimately make a choice. So, we say our objectives of selecting these greens, we'd start looking at the prices, all the quality information, we'd turn over all the packages, analyze the ingredients, then compare all those. And you can start to see that this is evidently not how choices occur in today's world. So, although that was pretty much the paradigm for quite some time, until Herbert Simon came along. And most of his work gets summarized in a couple concepts. The first is bounded rationality, and the second is satisficing. He won a Nobel Prize for his work. His most famous paper, one of my favorites, is a behavioral model of rational choice. And then also he wrote this book up here, Administrative Behavior. But to understand his work, what he really did was he questioned a lot of the economics that people are maximizing decisions. And instead, what he realized is there's so many things going on in the human mind that prevented people from maximizing their choice. And three of them happen to be these cognitive limitations. We're tired, we're fatigued, we don't have much willpower. The second is, we have imperfect information. Especially with this coronavirus right now, I'm hearing 16 different things. There's just too much of the stuff. And, I just don't have the right knowledge set to understand it. So, and then the lastly is we're just so busy. So the accumulation of these three things he called kind of this bounded rationality. And what this means is, and what the result is we aren't looking to maximize choices, we're looking to satisfy. In other words, a good enough decision in most cases is gonna work just well. There's not gonna be any damages, and a good enough choice is sufficient. And then Mr. Daniel Kahneman, who many of you may know, his book Thinking Fast and Slow really took a lot of his research and made it really come to life. But Daniel Kahneman won the Nobel Prize along with his colleague Amos Tversky, who extended Herbert Simon's research and brought it more to practical realms in terms of decision making with his heuristics and biases program, as well as System 1 and System 2. And what pretty much his work concluded is there's kind of just two brain systems. He summarized pretty much the complexity of all this decision making and judgments in stating that there's two systems for which our judgments and our decisions are made. We'll start with system 2, because that kind of is pretty much a lot of how we make rational choices. Is it's slow, it's conscious, it's effortful. And then on the other hand, we have system 1, which are more intuitive, they're fast, they're non-conscious. What the interesting thing is that a lot of his findings were is a lot of our operations, our processes for making decisions and judgments happen to fall in that system 1 bucket. And we can relate to this. Let's pull back to this example of choosing the mixed greens. Instead of gathering information, evaluating, comparing alternatives, in many cases, most people are going to just look at the front of the package and use these cues, what they'd call heuristics, or also known as mental shortcuts. So we might look at the package, see the green or see fresh, and that symbolize, okay, that's healthy. We see the word express, okay, that's convenient. We don't have to maybe wash it, and then we look and see like the sale tag, and that indicates to us that this is a great value. So, we're looking to pick up on these shortcuts instead of analyzing all the information on the packages, looking at all the products, then comparing them. We just use these shortcuts to make the decision. And, as you can probably assume, they're going to be good enough. These satisfying decisions using these shortcuts lead us to, choosing good enough products. So to kind of take a step back, when we look at this, you can start to see that, our system 2 is not really driving a lot of choices. Not many people are going to be spending the effortful time looking at all the facts, looking at all, comparing them, choosing the best one, but rather our decisions in many cases are going to be based on, our habits, our routines, so we're not thinking about them. They're informed by social influences, or we're using heuristic cues as it's displayed on the last slide, or we may just end up by nothing. That's choice overload, and that results in leaving with nothing. And you can start to think how this plays a role in our market research, and as our tradition, as we think about what types of ways we question and understand consumer behavior or physician behavior or patient behavior, things can be, are we more sitting in the camp of system 1 or system 2? I think one of the things that's interesting is, this isn't just relative to consumers or patients. This applies to some of the greatest people, the smartest people, the most sophisticated. No brain is immune to heuristics and biases, and how context influences our decisions, no matter who it is, whether you're Warren Buffett, Steve Jobs, Daniel Kahneman, a physician, a patient, a consumer. Biases apply to everyone. The human brain is no different across humans. So we're all susceptible to the same types of influences. So to summarize this first part here, before we get to the kind of more the practicals part, is, initially started as we used to want to maximize choices. Then it kind of moved to this bounded rationalities. Herbert Simon kind of recognized that, we don't need people aren't maximizing decisions. Satisfying is plenty enough. And then Daniel Kahneman, as well as Amos Tversky, helped uncover that choices are, pretty much mostly governed in the non-conscious, as opposed to just rationally deciding. So what? Why is this important? So, from our perspective here at b-sci, we're, and as you think about the paradigms for which research is typically conducted, a lot of it is built on understanding that system 2, that rational, kind of the stated intentions, the explicit attitudes, and what we're kind of really anchored on is, looking beyond that. understanding what is real behavior. What are those system one influences? So what I have on the screen here, as you can see, is, this is a meta-analysis, and what the findings were for this is, this is back from 2006. It's probably even more robust now, but the key takeaway is what people say, their attitudes, their liking, their intentions for doing something is not necessarily a good predictor, but rather a lot of these other things that come into play: social pressures, emotions, distractions, choice overload, our habits, our biases, and our heuristics. All these can be are more strongly correlated with the behavior, with actual behavior. So when we start thinking about measurement, we're going to want to understand some of these other things beyond someone's just basic attitudes and their intent. So as it relates to our point of view, if most people are making decisions in this system one, this non-conscious manner, we want to understand that from a market research perspective, and more importantly, we want to market to that. So that's kind of the premise for which we're looking at how we approach applying behavioral science. So the big takeaways from this is, behavioral science, it's the study of decision making. It applies across, no matter, whether you're measuring consumers, patients, doctors, no matter what. The human brain is the human brain, and it's susceptible to human biases, heuristics, and the same sorts of decision processes of all humans. The second is, a lot of our decision making is going to be non-conscious. There's different numbers always quoted out in the market. I think the big takeaway is a lot of the influences will be from the non-conscious side. The interesting thing about it is that's a huge opportunity for us, as we look to understand those and, optimize how we can go about impacting them. And then lastly, when we do that, there's going to be a significant opportunity to enhance your marketing and market research when applied in the correct way. So, let's move to more of the practical parts. So how can we go about infusing behavioral science into our research programs? So there's three kind of broad ways we'll cover off. The first is research design. The second is research methodology. And the last is research inputs. And the way I like to think of this is through a car, because, at the end of the day, I understand, everyone has their own research platforms, their processes, and, behavioral science doesn't want to throw away what we already have. I like to say, we're not reinventing the wheel. We're kind of just making it spin faster, spin better, I'm going to keep coming back to this car analogy because I think it's very fitting for us how we think about applying behavioral science. So the first thing is research design. And the best way I like to think about a behavioral science research design is like a frame of a car. It's something that rarely gets noticed, but it's fundamental for safe, effective, and high performance driving. It's better at transferring the horsepower to the pavement. And in this case, it's, a good behavioral science research design is better at translating our understanding of human decision-making and better at predicting behavior. So how do we go about doing this? The best way to think about a behavioral science research design is in three kind of chunks. And, when I work with a lot of different clients, we tend to generally, not necessarily have this process so perfected. We may just start with a research question, or we may have a lofty, interesting business goal, like growing sales or growing profitability, whatever it may be, or increasing our unit economics, whatever it may be. But the goal of a really solid behavioral science research design is it fundamentally connects the business question or business goal with the research question and is aligned with the behavior that you're looking to produce. So whether that's, getting a consumer to buy a product, having a physician RX our brand, we want to make sure that our research question aligns with the business goal as well as the behavioral outcome we're trying to produce. So let's give an example of this. The best way, the simplest way to pull together a research design in connecting the business goal with the behavior is, I like to think of it as like we have independent variables on our left, things we're going to test to impact the outcome on the right. And the dependent variable in most cases is a behavioral outcome. And so the things on the left, and what we're interested in is creating such a clean design that that when we see a difference between A, B, or condition C, that we know that the outcome is attributed to the effect that is produced by those independent variables. So there's certain things we do to make sure that we create a very clean, simple design. And the first is, we look for random assignment to any of the conditions. Then also we'll include a control, to look at the delta between our independent variables and compare that to our control to look at the differences for the outcome variable. So many of you guys, this shouldn't be groundbreaking. A lot of you guys are very familiar with maybe randomized controlled trials or clinical controlled trials. So we're adopting some of the features of those and standardizing or increasing the rigor of our research to enhance our outcomes. I kind of want to leave you guys with two things on research design that helps, solidify the frameworks. So the first is this, what we call our b-sci's target behavior. And it's just an exercise we do either, internally or collaboratively with a client. And that's really to identify the target behavior. It's, it's shocking to me so many times that, a lot of experiments like start ramping up and we don't even know what the key target behavior that we're trying to achieve is. And what we do to really address that is we define the target behavior, and specifically it's usually the W. So understanding who needs to perform the behavior, what different decision needs to be made to drive the change, when does the behavior happen, where does it happen, and how often does the behavior need to happen. And we're going to give an example of that a little bit later, but the key thing is for us to effectively measure change, we got to really identify what that target behavior is. This next part here is the b-sci's 3 B's framework. A lot of B's going on in here, but it's simple. Like there's a behavior that's currently happening in the marketplace, and then there's an desired or target behavior that we want to achieve. And to get there, we really need to understand not only what are the benefits, the things that can drive or enhance that behavior, but also what are the barriers that create the friction in that behavior being achieved. So we always do go through this exercise with clients to kind of not only, because we really want to surface all the different variables that could potentially enhance or inhibit the translation from the current to the target behavior. For those interested, feel free to reach out after. My email address will be on one of the final slides, and we can walk you through these or share these two exercises with you, because I think they're very helpful in structuring the research question and aligning the research design so it meets the business objective. Okay, great. I'm moving on to the next part here is research methodology. So if the research design is like the frame of our car, I would say the research methodology is like the engine. It's what supplies the horsepower. And I break down research methodologies into two kind of components. The first is simple survey tactics. And this sounds kind of mundane, maybe really simple to people, but it's kind of funny how how many times people overlook these little things. In fact, there's actually quite a bit of research done in this space on how you can optimize the predictive validity of our surveys just by reducing our researcher biases. So in the literature, they'd call this common method bias. And if you want, or if you're interested in this space, I definitely can send more materials on this. We definitely really pay a lot of attention when we're designing any of our surveys, especially to just simply how they're structured, how the questions are organized to prevent priming of the next one, how each question's framed, not to be leading, how the scales are designed so there's just not a ton of different checklists, and all the scale anchors, make sure they're not priming or biasing people anyways, all the way down to, just how we understand how far back we can ask people about how they can introspect on their behaviors. So there's many little, we could spend a whole hour on simple survey tactics to optimize survey design, but these are just largely overlooked, and they really need to be accounted for to optimize our survey research. And the second thing on this right side are these advanced techniques. There's plenty of these going around right now. And what they are simply indirect means for understanding and predicting behavior. There's some of them are implicit associations, as some of you may know, by looking at using time as a variable for choosing things. Some are biology based, using EEG, skin temp, neuroscience, and some are eye tracking. But from our perspective, we're interested in ones that are highly scalable. And we're going to talk about one in a moment. We use disguised choice quite a bit, so how we can mask surveys to get unbiased responses. And then also behavioral interviewing is another advanced technique. But I'm going to discuss one that, today that I think is very fitting, because it can be administered in a typical survey setting, and yet it can really enhance the predictive validity of our surveys and to understand really what people do in the real world. What we call it a behavioral choice methodology. The example we always give is, imagine if you were to ask someone, like, would you go to the gym? Would you work out? And I think most people would have some interest or intent of wanting to do something. However, we all know that not many people would actually do that. So to overcome that, we have a methodology where we create some skin in the game, and we call that a behavioral choice. And what that is and imagine if you were to ask that same person, would you go to the gym? How likely would you go to the gym? Versus, here's a $30 30-day subscription to Netflix, or a 30-day subscription to your gym, something like that, where you add the choice in there and there's skin in the game to win something, that changes the paradigm at that point. And that enhances the validity and becomes more predictive of what people do in the real world. So you could see on the right here, this is something like we do in a survey setting, is we'd offer someone the choice of the product or brand in question versus vice versa its competitors or its previous choice. And you could start to see if someone has the likelihood of winning and actually winning their the product or brand in question, this is going to significantly enhance the predictability of our results. And we're going to break an example down later on, which kind of illustrates how powerful this is. But, I think this is just one of the more interesting ways where we can capture consumer behavior or physician behavior or patient behavior in a way that is more likely to predict the outcomes that's going to happen in the real world. Okay, in this last section here is research inputs guided by theory. So we mentioned the design, which is like the frame of a car, the methodology, which is like our engine. And lastly, we have kind of theory, which I would say is like your GPS. Like a GPS, a GPS kind of tells us what's the most effective way to get to our destination. And theory in many cases provides shortcuts to our destination. There's literally hundreds and thousands of different behavioral science theories that can be applied, but I'm just going to give kind of a couple examples. But before we do any project working with clients, we always kind of get an understanding of what are some of the driving theories that could produce outcomes in our potential in the space we're working. So this one on the left here, some of you may have heard of it. It's called warmth and competence. And this is a popular, this is one of the more foundational theories coming out of social judgment, comes from Susan Fiske. In other words, there's two kind of dimensions which people are judged on, warmth and competence. Warmth is, are they safe and are approachable? And competence, are they capable? And, does this work? What's interesting is this can be applied not only to the people level, but also at the brand level and at the product level. And you could start to see, as when you analyze this, that like certain brands are more warmth and they're more inviting. So, you can imagine, and you can look at this competitively and, insights start to come apparent across brands, especially if it's a new brand that, it's not inviting. A lot of things, or like in today's age, a lot of things are technology based, so they're not as inviting as, or warm, shall we say. So looking at this is just, one means for which we can look at how we can enhance our research inputs for depending on the study. This one on the right, I think, is super interesting. I just have a very simple image here of it, but there's really a lot of, decades of research underneath optimal distinctiveness theory. This comes from Dr. Brewer, but what it states is it has to do with how we fit in society. So, you can imagine we all have our social groups and we want to fit in with our social groups. If we're a doctor, we want to be like a doctor. If we're, an athlete, we want to dress like an athlete. If we're a punk rocker, we want to dress like a punk rocker. And we do certain behaviors, we read certain things, we frequent certain places. But within that, we don't just want to be a part of our groups. We also want to stand out in our groups. And there's certain distinctive things people do to stand out. So there's a fine balance between fitting in with our groups and then standing out. And we actually looked at this with a couple of our different projects as it relates to clothing and apparel, as well as clothing, especially as companies want to grow and be appeal to the masses. For instance, you can imagine like Converse All-Stars, products that tap into the masses, but yet there needs to be some type of element where people can wear a Converse All-Star and still stand out. And you can start to see why Nike may have came out with Nike ID, and just coming up with different color schemes and finding ways where we can use different theory to drive business outcomes is what kind of the interest is with applying some of the theoretical frameworks to our inputs. So the summary so far is, research designs, these are like frames for our car. We want to really connect the behavior we're looking to change with the research and ladder that up to our business goal. We have two kind of tools that kind of help us with that, the 3 Bs. That connects the current behavior with the target behavior, as well as the tool to kind of understand the target behavior. The second thing is our research methodologies. This is kind of like our supplies the horsepower. It's what enhances the predictability of our methods. Make sure And there's two kind of things within that. Our simple survey tactics, just cleaning up our survey designs, making them simplified, streamlined, removing some of the bias from how we question things. And then second, applying some advanced techniques to optimize and better predict the behavior. The last thing is interventions guided by theory. There's definitely places and limitations, but looking at different theories, we can start using them as guides to advance and optimize how we bring different marketing inputs to test into our research. Okay, great. So now's our last part, and this is we're going to discuss 3 kind of case studies. And the first case study we're gonna go through is with a study we did with Brita, a Clorox brand. Many of you guys may know they play in the filtered water space, and I think this is one of the most phenomenal behavioral science challenges out there. Mainly because, if you think about it, water is free in 99% of households, and yet bottled water is one of the fastest and growing categories. This is pretty crazy when you think about it. We're paying for something we have free. And what's interesting is the category is not only growing, is people are paying more and more for bottled water. They're paying double, 3, 4 times the amount than what they used to pay with these fancy waters. But the goal of this research was, optimizing the choice of Brita filtered water and reducing bottled water consumption. And how we set this up, this was a pretty intense project. This was super fun. But we first did a literature review looking for a lot of those different applicable drivers, and the theories that could help us understand some of the areas that could potentially explain a lot of the behavior that were taking place in this category. The second thing we did was a behavioral change workshop. We gathered with all the Clorox folks, as well as the design folks, as well as our team here at b-sci. And what we did, as well as I will give a shout out to Matthew Wilcox. Him and his group were definitely there, and we did a fantastic workshop where we unearthed a lot of really good ideas based on the literature review. So we had a lot of different theories, which we'll kind of we'll disclose and uncover in a second. But what we did was started building ideas based on theory, based on potential drivers of decision making in that category. We next worked with a creative agency to kind of take those ideas and meld them into kind of interventions to test. And you'll see in a sec, these were going to be launched via social media. So it worked out well that we actually tested them in them and created them in a social media kind of look and feel. And then we put them in a quantitative behavioral test. It was a randomized controlled test, and we used that behavioral choice methodology to isolate what was the most effective intervention. Okay, so this is an example of what one of the interventions looked like. And so they were going to push this out via Instagram, so it made sense to test it like it was going to be in Instagram. And what it was, we set it up with, one image. It had a brief little mention at the bottom about what kind of the underlying psychology of what the actual intervention was. So in this case, this is kind of a social proof thing. See why many people are moving on from bottle. So I just wanted to kind of give the trajectory and direction of where people were going. But we also had other ones of these as well. So each of the different Instagram posts had a layer of behavioral science underpinning it. And this is kind of, so how did we go about testing this? This is what the design looked like. So as you could see on the left, we have a recruitment and screen, recruited the population. We have disguised instructions. And then we have our independent variables in the middle there, as you could see. Each of those A, B, C, D, E, and F were different Instagram posts. And before that and after that, we also had decoys. These were also Instagram posts, but they were unrelated to the actual category. So I think a few of them were like Bed Bath and Beyond. One was a mattress company. So these were things just so people didn't know the nature of the survey. So people were randomized, and they saw one of the conditions, and then they got entered into a disguised choice lottery. In other words, it's that methodology we discussed earlier. In other words, we gave someone the option to win a $30 bottled water gift card or a $30 filtered water reward towards the Brita brand. And, you can obviously see that there's a lot of skin in the game at this point. And this actually had an interesting result, as we'll see in a second. So when we looked at the behavioral choice question there, that behavioral choice methodology, and on the in each of these bars representing the different conditions, the interventions, one of them dramatically stood out. It was statistically and significantly more chosen than the bottled water condition against the control. And all the other ones, they outperformed the control. But in this methodology, we were able to identify a clear winner. And this is actually pretty interesting because, later on in the survey, we asked the basic attitude question, or an intention question. Did the post change your mind about buying bottled water? And when we looked at that across all the conditions, there was no difference. So, when we think about this holistically, using a traditional way of asking a question, and having someone cognitively process that, it was unable to work well in determining what was going to be effective intervention or to go to market with. So in this case, there was a clear winner. It was a fantastic study. Obviously, the behavioral choice methodology is, proved to be a strong winner in this case. So that's the first case study. The second one we have here was one of the more recent ones we did. Can't really disclose the brand, but the category is one that's actually kind of interesting. It's very novel. It's the allergy introduction category. The concept behind it is if you provide babies and infants with allergies, their susceptibility to getting those allergies later in life is significantly reduced. I mean, this sounds like a super winning proposition if I'm a parent. However, there's a lot of challenges involved in this. These products come in many forms with formulas and they're kind of mix-ins or supplements. So it's hard to know. The question of the research is where can this go in retail so we can grow this category, because it was only currently online, and they're moving into the retail markets into retail. So the question of this is for this experiment was which retail context is going to be best to optimize the choice of this product, the comprehension of the product, and willingness to pay a premium price for the product. And if you think about this business challenge for a second, this is kind of interesting because, although the kind of key benefit of this this whole category, this allergy introduction category, is that it's delivered in a food or it's delivered in a traditional format. So in other words, like for instance, if we put this in the the baby food context. And although it can serve a function as food, baby food is cheap. This is a, like, I mean, 10, 15, 20 times the price of, some of the baby foods out there. So, this is going to be a challenge then, if people are seeing this as just maybe just another baby food. Or in the supplement section, this might be opportunistic to grab higher willingness to pay, because you can imagine the supplement context, there's things that go up to $40, $50, $60 in there. So, it may not be outlandish to pay such a price for this product. However, there's downsides to this. It may be a little confusing. It may be, and also the moms are not going to frequent this aisle as much as you can imagine. We're shopping food and formula much more. So this was what we did in this study was we tested the 3 different contexts. So we had mock-ups of shelves of each context with the competitors. And we had our client's product in the context, as well as we had it at 2 different price points. So this was kind of a 3x2 design. There's, in other words, 6 conditions that moms would be randomized into. So 3 different contexts at 2 different prices. And we wanted to understand which of these contexts and price points would optimize the choice or the comprehension, the choice, and the willingness to pay. And each of them have their own reference points in terms of pricings and products, and it shapes what people think of what this product is. And how we showed all this, we weren't kind of giving them unlimited time to look at this. We wanted to make it as contextually valid as what would be experienced in a store. So we can't have people looking at it for extended durations. They need to be representative of our context. Excuse me. So we can't disclose the winning space, but what I can tell you is one of the higher priced actually was one of the more chosen contexts. So I thought that was pretty fantastic of a result, to be able to see an area which, certain competitive products actually enhanced the willingness to pay. In other words, people chose the product more when it was priced at a higher point in one of the contexts. So this is just what some of the power of behavioral science can bring to how we go about understanding consumer choices, as well as what they are willing to pay, especially as brands are looking to premiumize too. So my last section here, we have a special guest who happens to be the CEO of b-sci to bring this a case study to life in the healthcare pharmaceutical side of things.
Thanks, Jason. I had nothing to do with the introduction, and full disclosure, I'm not special at all. But this is Ellis Roberts here. I wanted to just, we've got a lot of healthcare clients on the phone. We geared this webinar up primarily to consumer-based categories, but given I think we've got over 50 healthcare clients on the phone, we wanted to just show perhaps an example of how our approach plays out within the healthcare space, because that's a pretty significant area of work for us. So this was a project, oncology project in a particular tumor type, and the primary prescribing dynamics were driven by this really ingrained habit. Basically, physicians would test for a particular genetic mutation as a standard, and if that mutation test came back positive, they would pretty much automatically prescribe targeted therapy. So it was almost like this automatic impulsive reaction to the test. This is the kind of situation where if there is a level of automaticity or a habit, a non-conscious habit that's driving the behavior, it's very difficult to educate people out of that habit. It's hard to fight a non-conscious decision driver with a conscious or educational message. So, in this instance, if you think about the habit cycle, essentially, there's a cue or a trigger. It leads to a particular behavior. That behavior, you feel some level of reward for that behavior, some kind of just positive impulse. And that positive impulse reinforces the same behavior when you see that same cue or trigger. In this instance, testing positive for the mutation was the cue, and that led to targeted therapy as a response. Again, to break the habit, you've got to disrupt the habit, and really you've got to do that at source. So in this instance, it's no point trying to just compare our client's product, or for our client to compare their product to the targeted therapy and show that it's better. You actually have to deal with the source, which is that trigger or cue, the genetic testing. So you'll see, in terms of, this is the last slide on this case study, the approach we take here is not the traditional marketing approach. Actually, only in step 4 does it start to look more like our traditional marketing. So this is, what we call the 4D framework here. First of all, we have to disrupt the habit. The number one behavior we have to change right off the bat is to try and eliminate this automaticity and force an active choice between products at that first line of treatment stage. We do that by raising the stakes, but also by bypassing the trigger. So if the test takes place, it's unlikely that our client's product is going to get used in first line. Therefore, the focus here was on, you can prescribe immediately, even whilst you're simultaneously doing the test. So we bypass that automaticity, that habit. Then when it came to, actually the product itself, this was a category that had moved on pretty significantly, but the definitions of success hadn't moved on with it. And so, with fairly low success metrics, the competitor product does well. So the goal here is, we've got to change the playing field, change the definition of success, because our client's product, which had high long-term efficacy, high long-term outcomes, but maybe some increased short-term side effects and safety issues, that was a playing field where they would lose unless we could raise the definitions of success metrics. So that was, how do we move this goal? Just like, if you've got an iPhone, you expect that the iPhone is very different now than it was 10 years ago. You expect more from it. Just like in a category like this that's moved on in the last 10 years, you've got to expect more from your products. Then the third piece is, once, if there's this ingrained habit, this ingrained mental model, it's very hard to fight that directly. We employ what we would call here the judo strategy, where you use your opponent's strength and momentum against them. You deflect rather than confront. And so in this instance, it's not our product is better than your product. It's actually, the focus is on selling before the competitor product, not against it. And leveraging, a really important dynamic in a lot of tumors, which is sequencing, the sequencing of products. So, you're not confronting that competitor. Our product is a great starter. Their product is a great bench player. Together, they're a great team. Your first line, their second line. And then finally, we get back to more what I would call the traditional marketing is, first of all, show how the product really delivers on this new definition of success. We've created these new success metrics. This is how physicians now think about what success is in this category. And here's how this product just matches directly to that. And then finally, that direct comparison that we eventually get to, the two products that we were talking about, the client's product and the competitor product, they really weren't the same in terms of their performance. And that wasn't clearly understood. And at that point, we get to where we're actually differentiating. So, different way to approach an issue than typical. We can't just aim to educate physicians into submission. And when there's non-conscious drivers of behavior, we've got to deal with them directly rather than through conscious sort of educational sales strategies. So Jason, I'll pass it back over to you.
Great. Thank you, Ellis. So we're just going to wrap up here in the last few minutes. We just have three this is our key summaries here. The first thing is consumers. I think one of the big learnings is, consumers, patients, physicians, we're not all making rational choices, and they're not based on all the available information. These are really not, in most cases, non-conscious, satisficing, driven by heuristics. And to the extent that we can understand and optimize based on this, we can improve our marketing and market research. The second thing is, it was very more practical. Start applying behavioral science. Depending on where you are in your research program, there's things discussed today where you can just start connecting the behavioral outcome you're interested in and tie that to your research and to your business goal. The second thing is just, simple survey tactics, definitely things to enhance the rigor and the predictive validity of our surveys, as well as some of more enhanced and sophisticated things, such as the behavioral choice methodology, as we mentioned. And then also leveraging the robust amounts of research that's conducted on a daily basis and bringing those into the things that we test, whether that's new products, new innovations, new advertisements, new campaigns, or new interventions in the healthcare space, whatever it may be. Let's start leveraging a lot of what's already learned. So we have my email address there, phone there. Happy to discuss any of these topics we went through today. And discuss any of how we can help in those spaces. To give you an idea of where, when to call b-sci, shall we say, I have this slide here. We tend to operate in kind of 5 key spaces: this journey space, new products, innovation, understanding and changing physician as well as patient behavior, messaging and communications, and last is premiumization. So I'm going to see if we have any questions here. We looked at, okay, so I have a question from someone who says, many Americans already have subscriptions to Netflix. Wouldn't they be factoring this into their choice selection? Absolutely right. That was just used as a kind of a metaphorical example, just to give you an idea of how, people give socially desirable responses, but we always try to create a choice scenario that can overcome the social desirable response. Especially, the example that comes to mind, especially as there's this big health wave coming, of course, people say they're going to choose health over taste, but that's usually never the case in the marketplace. We always choose taste over health. So finding ways where we can unearth the true decision making is kind of the point underlying the choice methodology. The Netflix is just an example, but despite me being loving working out, I might choose the Netflix option myself. And there's one other question, and it says, have you tried using this approach for concept tests? That is a great question. And yes, depending on what the concepts look like, but we do this quite often to kind of understand early on whether there's going to be some behavioral traction with the concept or not. Okay, oncology related. How can one discuss sequencing if there are no clinical trial data to support sequencing of drugs? I'm gonna pass this to Ellis for a moment.
Okay, sorry, just jumping back. How can one discuss sequencing if there are no clinical trial data? Yeah, so if that's the case in a particular category, then absolutely, you're not going to hit that kind of message directly. I think the key point here, though, is thinking about not a direct what we would call a confrontational sale, but thinking about deflection. Yeah, they can both work well, but one of them, in this case, our client's product, is the obvious first line choice. So, everything is, when we think about these marketing tactics, everything is obviously going to be context specific. If it's something that we can't do, then we have to steer away from it. What we want to do is make sure that if we understand, the underlying dynamics, how do we actually go about leveraging those?
Okay, great. There are a couple more questions. We're going to follow up with you via email. Wanted to thank you guys for taking time out of your day to join us. Looking forward to bringing some more behavioral science to your organizations. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.